Welcome to the Backster School of Lie Detection. I'm Cliver Backster, and during the next 6 weeks here in San Diego, you're going to be involved in a very intensified instructional course in the use of the polygraph, or so-called lie detector.
In the course of a career dedicated to investigation for federal and municipal law enforcement agencies, Cliver Backster has earned a reputation as the world's foremost authority on the polygraph.
Well, as of February 2nd, 1966, I'd been in the polygraph field full-time for 18 years. And this particular morning, I'd been working all night in the laboratory and had decided to water a plant in the lab, very similar to the plant here, Jacina cane plant. My thought was that as the moisture arrived to the leaf of the plant, the plant should be a better conductor, and I should get a reading on the chart. Well, strangely enough, I didn't get this at all, and in fact, it did just the opposite. Instead of the tracing edging upward as it should have on the chart, it went into sort of a wild excitation, very similar to the first part of a human taking a polygraph test. But then it occurred to me, just about 14 minutes along, what would be the real optimum threat to the well-being of a plant. In fact, the imagery of fire entered my mind, and I not only thought, but I fully intended to burn the very leaf that was being tested with a match. Now, I had no matches in the room at the time, and I don't smoke, and I had to go next door to my secretary's area to get a match. But the interesting thing is that right at the split second that imagery of fire entered my mind, the tracing reflecting the changes in the plant just went right off the top of the page. And the only thing that occurred at that time, no lighting of a match, nothing else, merely the imagery of fire. And I must say that as of 14 minutes along in that initial observation on the morning of February 2nd, 1966, my life just hasn't been the same.
Responding to the initial experience, when a plant apparently read his mind, Backster works nights on his own in his small laboratory. His goal is to perfect an experiment that will satisfy the rigid criteria of the scientific establishment. Backster hopes to show that plants react to any termination of life in their immediate environment. During the next 6 hours, at some undetermined moment chosen by a randomizer, these brine shrimp will fall to their deaths in boiling water. By totally automating his equipment, Backster is determined to eliminate human influence. In another room, completely separate from his laboratory, Backster has placed a philodendron plant, a polygraph, and a videotape recorder. Carefully, he places a leaf between a pair of electrodes that will monitor the electrical activity of the plant. As he has done during countless police interrogations, Backster establishes a baseline on his polygraph to get an accurate recording of the reaction of his subjects. The video recorder will tape the details of the experiment in Backster's absence.
For the automation of this experiment to be successful, I have to get a certain distance away from my lab so that my consciousness won't affect the results.
The California dawn often finds Cleve Backster still at work in a small room behind his laboratory. The results of each night's work must be carefully analyzed and recorded. In spite of his high percentage of successful results, only a few daring individuals from the scientific establishment have come forward with offers to replicate his experiments or test his results. The great majority are content simply to condemn his efforts without taking the trouble to investigate their validity.
A few brine shrimp die and the plant feels their death. I think it's the smallness of the event that makes it so significant. It means that even on the lower levels of life, there's a profound consciousness or an awareness that binds all things together.
Research conducted in the Soviet Union leads scientists to believe that plants may think. Attached to delicate electronic instruments, a cabbage plant registers annoyance to the exhaling of tobacco smoke on its leaf surfaces. A scene familiar in any kitchen takes on special importance in this experiment.
Володя, переключи задание по всем параметрам. Тамара, бери препарат. Все готовы? Начинай.
In some mysterious way, the plant which is attached to the instrument is able to feel the mutilation of its comrade. In a more advanced experiment, technicians were asked to pass through a laboratory containing 2 living cabbage plants. One of the subjects has been instructed to destroy the plant which is not attached to the electronic instruments. Hours later, the technicians are asked to return to the scene of the crime. The evidence is clear. The remaining plant has correctly identified the assailant.
Ты должна быть сердитой.
During recent years, gardening enthusiasts throughout Japan have been privileged to witness the remarkable demonstrations of Dr. and Mrs. Kenneth Hashimoto. Dr. Hashimoto, Managing Director and Chief of Research for the Fuji Electronic Industries, has constructed special instruments which translate the electrical output of plants into modulated sounds, giving voice to a cactus. Relying on her affinity for plants, Mrs. Hashimoto looks forward to actual conversation with her cactus. Convinced that it possesses an intelligence, she is determined to teach it the Japanese alphabet. Norman Goldstein, a professor of biology and expert in the new science of electrophysiology, agrees to review the results of the experiment, which will determine whether the plant, Mimosa pudica, actually responds to human emotions.
As you can see, we have the normal copper screen and such as that Faraday cage, block out electromagnetic signals, radiations. But in addition to that, we have a plexiglass over here that blocks the wind movements and ion movements and air flows that would, shake the plant, cause abnormal signals. We also have a motion detector in here, which will allow us to look and see whether any external motions or movements have interfered with the experiment, so we can tell when the plant is actually vibrated.
Where's the subject with respect to the cage now?
We're going to seat him, within a few feet of the cage, probably about 5 feet. And he'll be viewing a screen. He'll be watching a stimulus movie that we're providing. Mm-hmm. And then his emotional responses should carry over into the cage here and affect the plant. That's what we're hoping for.
We're going to be measuring your galvanic skin response, which means your emotional activity.
Okay. Let's hope there is some.
Is that too tight?
No, that's great.
Okay. This is going to measure your blood volume. And this will measure the muscle tension in your forehead, or the EMG.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
Good.
Very convincing. I have to think about that one. Well, let's say that the experiment is quite well done. Then you're claiming that the individual's response is producing some kind of energy display. When you're finished analyzing your data and it supports your contentions, you can imagine what importance this will be. You can imagine it'll change our whole picture of how we relate to plants, so that we're interacting with them all the time.
For 6 years, L. George Lawrence, a Silesian-born electronics engineer, has used an abandoned prospector's cave in the California desert as a base of operations for research in a new science called biocommunications. His purpose in choosing such a remote location was to eliminate man-made electronic interference during a series of remarkable experiments.
I started my work on plans in 1962 while I was an engineer in the aerospace industry. And at that time, it was one of our goals to develop jam-proof missile components. Now, after much experimentation, my attention turned to living plant material, in particular to plant leaves. Plant leaves are able to react to gravitational changes, to temperature changes, to electrostatic fields, and so on, simultaneously. Now, a man-made sensing device cannot do this. So, as time went on, and I experimented with these various plants and plant leaves, I noted very unusual reaction patterns. Now, at that time, I thought that my equipment was defective. It did not occur to me that I was witnessing a profound consciousness in these living plants. But I was an engineer, a nuts and bolts man. I needed to perfect a machine-based system just for the specific purpose of finding out the truth about consciousness in plants. And to my extreme surprise, it worked. There is indeed a consciousness in the plant kingdom.
Lawrence's latest equipment differs significantly from that of other researchers. It dispenses with the necessity to use electrodes directly attached to the subject. He has found through experiments that living vegetable tissue perceives signals with greater sensitivity than electronic sensors. These tiny mustard seeds, removed from a nutrient bath at the point of germination, will act as antennae to receive distant biological radiation. Emerging into the desert night, Lawrence prepares his equipment. At the end of a Faraday tube, he inserts the seeds which will monitor the signals. A rotating beam splitter will eliminate radio interference. Consulting a star map, Lawrence searches for the constellation Ursa Major, the Great Bear. It is to celestial coordinates 10 hours, 40 minutes by 56 degrees that he will direct his instrument. Lawrence scans the heavens, waiting for the seeds to receive a distant signal. After analysis of his experiment by the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C., L. George Lawrence believes the living plant tissue in his instrument is receiving a message from outer space.
Plants communicate with each other. It would also appear, in our case, that we have actually eavesdropped on a communication that has gone on for millions and millions of years. And by some freak accident, by simply allowing a sensing instrument to remain pointed at the sky, we were able to intercept what seems to be a universal truth.
When you first say water to people, they think, oh, it's just, the stuff I drink every day and I bathe in it. I mean, what could be so special? Let's take, for example, an experiment that was done and this is where I get really excited because it also relates to the search for communication with other star systems.
Okay.
You see in this experiment done, and this is in Water, the Great Mystery, where they take a pitcher of water, and they separate the pitcher of water into two pitchers of water, and they separate both pitchers at a great distance. And when you expose information to one pitcher of water, the other at a distance restructures itself according to that information instantly, using atomic clocks.
That's incredible.
Instantly. And what amazes me about that is over and over and over again, no matter how far you go back, and going back, actually, there's a Russian scientist named Alexander Zhezhevsky, whom in the 1930s noticed that bacteria in water would constantly become agitated during the exact moment of solar flares. And he noticed this over and over and over again. Whenever there was a solar flare, the activation of the bacteria going crazy happened before the solar radiation hit the Earth. In fact, it takes 8.3 minutes for sun solar radiation to travel from the sun's 93 million miles from Earth to get here.
Right.
So the bacteria knew it instantly. Why? Why did the bacteria in the water know? Well, the interesting thing is our sun is 93% hydrogen, and there's oxygen in the sun. And that means that these two bodies of water at a distance are actually talking to each other instantaneously. And the bacteria in the water gets activated because the water is receiving this information. Now, when we consider the vast distances, for example, the distance between our Milky Way galaxy and the Andromeda galaxy, which is 2.2 million light years away, if you were communicating using radio waves with Andromeda, if we could, it would take over 2.2 million years to get there. But yet, the hydrogen in the stars in the Andromeda galaxy and the hydrogen in our stars and the spiraling arms of the Milky Way galaxy and the water in our own bodies can communicate instantaneously over these.
See, you're onto something, David.
You see, there's something going on here. Now, what does it mean if scientists can prove that this little element that is virtually existent everywhere in the universe can communicate with different bodies of distant hydrogen instantaneously, and that it has consciousness, and that the consciousness of water is kind of like Professor Rustrom Roy at Penn State calls an alphabet. You can give it new words and new sentences, and therefore it structures itself differently according to the information you give it. And now when you kind of add all the pieces together, and you realize that no super-intelligent civilization would be broadcasting anything in the radio spectrum because it travels at the speed of light and it's much too slow. And you're starting to see this evidence of action at a distance through hydrogen aqueous systems like the sun and bodies of water and telepathy. The evidence is overwhelming.
Something about these people who actually know the truth. The rest of us here, we're sitting around in cyberspace and on the Internet speculating about whether any of this stuff is real, and yet here you have people that are walking up to a crashed disk and looking into the eyes of a wounded or dying alien. I mean, you can't even imagine what that's actually like if you're actually there. There's no more doubt in your mind at that point that we're not alone in the cosmos. And in the course of Sergeant Clifford Stone's work, he was given briefing documents which gave very precise descriptions of all 57 varieties of ET, so that if he came up to a crashed extraterrestrial wreckage, that he would know who he was dealing with when he got there and what kind of characteristics they had.
When I got out in 1989, we had cataloged 57 different species. You have individuals that look very much like you and myself that could walk among us and you wouldn't even notice the difference, except for some of the things that they might be able to go ahead, even in a dark room, and touch an object and go ahead and identify what color that object might be. They would have a heightened sense of smell, sight, hearing. The situation is that you have various types of what we normally call grays. We didn't call them grays in the military, but you had at least 3 types of the grays. You had some that were much taller than we were. The unique thing that I'd like to point out for the most part is that the entities that we did catalog were in fact humanoid, and that creates a question that yet has to be answered by science.
It seems that this particular galaxy has designed human beings exclusively to evolve within it. And to get back to your original question, yes, most of these people have essentially a very similar set of beliefs. The idea that the fundamental energy that makes all matter as we know it is conscious and has an awareness that is essentially unified.
Since 1959, the Academy of Sciences of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics has advanced research for the application of automation and cybernetics in plant husbandry. Connected to electronic instrumentation, these plants express their wishes directly, without the need of human guidance. In agricultural centers of the future, plants will show themselves to be fully rational beings, controlling their intake of water and nutrients, and even regulating the temperature and humidity of their environment. We're just beginning to understand the language of plants. It is a difficult and fascinating road wherein a multitude of surprises awaits us.